Order. Helen Maguire to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm absolutely delighted to have secured this debate, the first Westminster Hall debate that I've managed to secure, and I would like to move that this House believes that the United Kingdom's capacity in explosive weapons disposal and victim assistance requires utmost government support, particularly at a time of extreme geopolitical unrest. And thank you, Chair. It's an absolute honour to speak under your chairmanship, and I welcome the Minister here today as well. So 2 weeks ago in Parliament, I met with specialists from our explosive ordnance disposal community, the military, the police, the commercial sector, academia and related NGOs. We discussed, among other things, the United Kingdom's enviable global reputation for our expertise in search and disposal and victim assistance. We have not just a global reputation, but also a global reach. Impacted countries around the world turn to the UK to provide search and disposal assistance, policy advice and training. Plus, we have a vibrant EOD equipment, production and export sector. Our humanitarian mine action delivery through the FCDO Global Mine Action Programme sees our major charities working on almost every continent. With a budget of £14.8 million for 23-24, this is the UK's main vehicle to tackle the threats posed by landmines, cluster munitions and other explosive remnants of war, known as ERW. We've all seen the photographs of the Princess of Wales in the minefield in Angola, but there's so much more that the United Kingdom does to make the world safe from explosive weapons, and indeed within our borders. At our meeting, we agreed that the UK certainly has the capability, but our capacity to cope with the major conflicts currently happening and those in danger flaring up may well be stretched. These conflicts will result in an overwhelming need for explosive weapons disposal expertise once any form of peace is allowed to descend. Explosive weapons are being used in these modern conflicts to an extent we haven't seen for generations. The number of people killed and injured by explosive weapons is mind-numbingly high. In the last 3 years, there's been a 70% increase in civilian casualties, with Ukraine and the Middle East the major cause. In Ukraine, there are now more amputees than the UK has military personnel. In 1999, Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention, also known as the Ottawa Convention or Mine Ban Treaty, came into force. The UK was one of its first signatories. This was soon followed by the Cluster Munitions Convention in 2010. Neither Russia nor the United States signed up to either convention. Ukraine did. But now we're in a situation where the USA are offering Ukraine the use of anti-personnel landmines, a weapon that Russia has been using since day one of the conflict. Aggressors throughout history have never let the rules of war or international probation interrupt a good night's sleep. While those countries who do hold dear the rule of law are thus forced to fight with one hand tied behind their back. We are not in any position to stop Ukraine using landmines or cluster munitions, but we can help them clear up the mess once the hostilities are over. Landmines are not a new weapon, but technological advances have made them increasingly sophisticated and dangerous. The sheer variety of weapons being used in Ukraine, from Cold War-era landmines to airdrop Russian munitions, which are now triggered seismically by recognising approaching footsteps, and these pose a huge challenge to those sent to clear them. Many new smart weapons are battery-powered, and the claim is that once the battery goes flat, the weapon is no longer a threat. But there is still a piece of explosive material stuck in the ground, and that still needs to be cleared. It will take decades to make the land safe again. The search and clearance task will be vast, and the UK is in a strong position to play a leading role in helping Ukraine to clear the explosive threats. Since my meeting with the professionals in Parliament, I've had an online briefing with a British EOD specialist based in Ukraine. I asked him what his particular concerns were and where he felt the UK could make a difference. His first response was about the lack of trained personnel required to address the magnitude of contamination in Ukraine. 150,000 square kilometres of land is considered at risk and in need of survey before clearance can take place. And even with the likelihood of 75 to 80% of this area not being physically contaminated, it would take at least 10,000 deminers to work all year round for 10 years to make the land safe. And this is a conservative estimate. And currently we think there might be maybe 2,000 deminers in Ukraine. This led us on to discuss the availability of a suitable equipment. On this, his major concern is the lack of coordination between the different equipment donor countries and companies. The operators know there is equipment available, even in country, but they don't know exactly what or where. This leads to a lack of clarity into what is still required and what specific training needs to be on offer. They have a number of land clearance machines from various countries, including arm track machines from the UK. But these can only be used in very particular terrains, and there's a multitude of different terrains to be cleared. The lack of donor coordination is not unique to Ukraine, and this is an issue that the UK is in a good position to lead on at a diplomatic level in donor coordination meetings at the UN. Again, not unique to Ukraine and of concern to the operators is the issue of export, import and control licensing. Demining equipment is being supplied to Ukraine, but the licenses to actually use it are not then being issued by the Ukrainian authorities. Our deminer said, and I quote, "I can guarantee there is equipment in a warehouse somewhere that should be in the field. Equipment like this will be collecting dust because of the lack of licensing and suitable training." There's a role there for the UK to negotiate an easing of restrictions with the Ukrainians. I asked about the role of emerging technology in survey and clearance work. His response was that technology was a useful additional role, but nothing could provide a perfect solution for every context. Total assured clearance can only really ever be achieved by a suitably trained human operative on the ground. I might add at this point that a number of UK academic institutions are at the forefront of research into highly sophisticated demining technology such as drone-mounted ground penetrating radar, chemical signature analysis and ground anomaly analysis. If we are to improve the pace and scale of demining operations, then we must ensure that research into demining technology receives support. Moving on to assistance to the appalling number of victims of exploding weapons, we discussed the possible role for demining operators to take on injured former combatants and retraining them as either deminers themselves or equipment technicians. This would give these veterans a sense of purpose in the continuing defence of their country. The Revive campaign here in the UK is working to coordinate a PhD programme with Imperial College and the National University of Kiev Molia Academy to investigate the link between blast injury and self-identity both in civilians and the military. The results of this research will inform our approach to victim assistance in many other conflicts and contexts around the world. As a final point about UK specialists operating in complex environments, our deminer said that the role of the UK insurance industry was vital to allow them to operate in areas like Ukraine or the Middle East. Our UK regulatory framework on insurance companies ensures that specialist policies for demining activities are considered as fit for purpose. And so returning to our theme of the UK's capability and capacity, explosive weapon clearance is not just about saving lives and land release. Our EOD activity can be a tool for peace building, economic development and reconstruction post-conflict. In post-conflict countries, it can be a powerful diplomatic tool. At a time when there's a seismic shift in geopolitical power, the UK needs to have a suite of effective and impactful diplomatic tools, and our EOD specialism is one such tool. The UK government is rightly focused on bringing the conflicts to an end, and we are supplying much needed equipment and materials to Ukraine. And our defence industries are heavily supported by our trade and export departments. But are we overlooking our post-conflict services? How much consideration is there in Whitehall for the EOD task? When conflicts are over, there's a need to return the land back to its previous use. In the case of Ukraine, often agricultural use. This brings jobs, enables individuals to support their families, supports the local economy and global food security. I mentioned at the beginning that the rise in victim numbers was huge. Victims, both physically and psychologically, are scarred for life. And at the meeting 2 weeks ago, I had the absolute privilege to speak to 3 victims of explosive weapons. 1, a refugee from Ukraine, and 2 who'd taken their children to a pop concert in Manchester. They had similar stories, although from very different contexts. When an explosive weapon is cleared, a threat has been removed, a life has been saved, a job well done. But if you're a victim of an explosive weapon, that is your whole life changed. What we hear from victims is that there's plenty of support and medical attention at the time of impact, but over time they become forgotten. Yeah. Hard-stretched local health services and charities are left to care for them, not just the civilian victims, but military too. I've already referred to the psychological trauma associated with an injury in Ukraine and the research into the impact on self-identity. One of the voices at my meeting was that of a leading surgeon at the Blast Injury Centre at Imperial College. Here is a UK institution leading in the field of research into understanding the impact of blast on the human body and developing the tools to protect the body from blast and the prosthetics for those who fall victim. It is only relatively recently that through the Blast Injury Centre research we start to learn about the differences of impact on male and female bodies, and that, for the deminers, the one traditional size of protective gear does not fit the female physique. Last year, the Centre produced a field manual on paediatric blast injury. This was very quickly translated into both Ukrainian and Arabic. This document tragically highlights the fact that it is children that are increasingly becoming the victims of explosive weapons. We are privileged in this country to have some of the best facilities on dealing with the physical and psychological impacts of blast. But do we have the resources and the political will to provide that lifelong support that many victims require? Again, I ask, how much consideration is there at Whitehall towards the long-term victim assistance both globally and domestically? Clearing the millions of explosive remnants of war will take huge effort and cost billions of pounds. Supporting the victims needs the same level of attention. I began this debate by saying how positively we are seen in the world for explosive ordnance disposal capability. I related a story from a deminer in Ukraine. I explained the importance of long-term victim assistance, and I've asked 2 questions of the Minister. I'm currently in the process of drawing together a new all-party parliamentary group on explosive weapons and their impact, and I'm looking forward to taking this debate as the first of many future conversations with the Minister and his colleagues on just the issues raised here today.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered government support for the explosive ordnance disposal community. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A real pleasure to serve under your chairship as always. You know you're a friend of everyone in this House, but you already know that. I think your humour and social engagement is something that we all appreciate very much. So a real pleasure, and I mean that, and we all mean that, by the way. Can I commend the Honourable Lady for setting the scene so very, very well? I want to give an example of course, why it's important from something that happened in my own constituency just in the last 4 months, okay? And also I want to then refer to the international stage, because the Honourable Lady has very clearly set out the scene and the reasons why this debate is important. It's unfortunate, Mr. Chairman, that perhaps maybe more aren't here to highlight and support the Honourable Lady, but there's also many demands upon other members' reasons for being here. Can I say it's a real pleasure to see the Minister in his place, a gentleman who has personal experience, and I know that when we ask the things that we're going to ask for, and the Honourable Lady has asked for, that we'll get a very positive response. And also nice to see the Shadow Minister in his place as well. Both Shadow Ministers here, Lib Dem spokesperson as well, and we look forward to the contribution of them all. I'm going to speak, if I can, very in the introduction of a recent knowledge on this issue, not due, as my friend for East London and myself would have, unfortunately, much experience of the troubles in Northern Ireland of some 30+ years, and we can refer to many things that happened and what that means, but because nearly just slightly over 4 months ago, we had the need of army expertise in the main town of my constituency, Newtownards. When you heard, as we often heard over our life, and we probably have a longer life than maybe most people in this chamber, personally, we can refer to many things that happened. So I received a message to say that there was a bomb in Newtownards. So right away, to be truthful, Mr. Chairman, my heart sunk. I said, oh goodness me, not again, you know, as we thought, as somebody decided to have a terrorist bomb attack somewhere in the town of Newtownards. The last bomb that I knew of in Newtownards was in 1993. I can remember it very, very well. It was an IRA bomb. It devastated the centre of Newtownards. I was at my Orange Lodge meeting in Kilcubbin, some 10 miles down the road, but we heard the bomb explosion that night in our meeting, and as soon as we heard it, and from a distance, of course, as well, right away you're mindful of what was taking place. But the devastation to property and to the mental health of those around it was substantial. Destroyed businesses, some didn't come back, some people were injured, and still have those scars of what took place. So when I received the message, my heart definitely sank. I think I had probably a large dose of butterflies in my stomach as I was trying to ascertain exactly what was going on. And after a quick phone call to the local police, I was able to ascertain exactly what was taking place in Newtown. This was from a different war, and the munition found was identified as being an airdrops SC-500 German bomb from World War II. Now, that didn't lessen the impact because of where it was. That bomb, when it was originally let go from the German bomber, was on desolate land, or on farmland, I would say, which only now, some 83 years later, Mr. Chairman, has now been built upon. So whenever the builder was excavating, as he was, he suddenly realised that what he'd come upon at that time. The bomb was understood to have been in and around some 83 years old, but it still posed a significant risk to public safety, even after all this time. It was found as developers were digging foundations at the next phase. This is the third phase of the housing development, and the action was quick and decisive. And I have to put in record, Mr. Chairman, my thanks to the bomb disposal experts, and also to the PSNI, because they were all able to respond in a decisive, impactful, quick, urgent. They understood the risk. And those people who had just bought houses, I was up immediately into the area to speak to residents, because they contacted me. They all had to move out. They were worried about their houses, just new houses that they bought, quite substantial, and the concerns were incredible. This is a highly complex operation that prompted the evacuation of a large number of homes, indeed hundreds of homes, within 400 metres of where the bomb was located. But local police officers worked around the clock to engage with those impacted. They had a cordon across, and all the houses, all down towards the new development, were all cordoned up. Now, obviously, that was one of the things I want to speak about as well, is whenever you do have an unexploded bomb, what does it mean? There are people in their homes who are not able to move out. They're disabled. There was, unfortunately, but it tells you about life, there was people who had terminal cancer, who were on medication. There was people who had COPD, whose very breath of life, Mr. Chairman, was in that oxygen bottle in their house, where they were cared 24/7. So that's the impact that these things can have upon people as well. And then you have people who, I remember speaking on the Sunday to the lady at the cordon, and it was her house, but the house that she had bought, well, it was the nearest house to where the bomb was. And all of a sudden, here's a lady who was saying, I've just bought this house. The windows I just put in last week. I'm going to go in next week, a week after, to sort out the decor. And will my house be there after they do whatever they're going to do? That's the question. So when it comes to this debate, I have a personal knowledge of why it's important to have this debate, and also some of the things that go through people's minds, as you do, as I would as well, Mr. Chairman, about the people who are ill and have health conditions and can't move out, those who just want to stay in their house to look after their dogs and cats. These are elementary things, but they're really decisive things for people. So we were able, thankfully, out of the goodness of many people in Newton Ards and district, able to find B&Bs, Airbnbs, other places where people could go and stay with their family. We're even able to find, Mr. Chairman, someone who would look after their dogs and their cats. So people's generosity I never feel, Mr. Chairman, to be encouraged and moved by the goodness of people when it comes to putting their hands up and doing their best to try and make things easier for others. Now, a highly complex operation that had prompted the evacuation of a large number of homes. The disposal team was comprised of members of the Army's 321 EOD and Search Squadron, who alongside the police service led the major operation. They were also assisted by other emergency services and partners who all provided expert knowledge in managing the high-risk emergency situation. The thing about it was as well, while we had hoped that these sorts of things weren't going to happen again, all of a sudden it was back, and there it was, we were confronting that, and people's questions are really important. The local council, the local council as well, also made available the Blair Main Leisure Centre, so that if people wanted somewhere to stay, if they weren't able to find accommodation, and also the authorities, the housing executive were there, the DWP were there, the police were there, everyone was available, and it became a gigantic effort of response from the whole area. Very happy to give away.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Would agree with me that our thanks are due to all of the personnel, the EOD personnel who act not just in the United Kingdom but internationally, as we've heard from the mover of the motion, but also in Northern Ireland today, even in the post-ceasefire era that we're in. We have 100 to 200 instances every year where EOD personnel are called out to deal with landmines and with other devices that are planted. Some of them are not genuine, but they are called out, and we all of us owe a real debt of gratitude to those personnel who put their own lives at risk in trying to protect others.
As always, I thank my honourable friend, the member for East London Derry, for his intervention. He's right to underline that actually, and the importance of it as well. While recognising very much that everybody came together to do their best and to make it happen, I say this because I want to go on to then move on to Ukraine if I can and speak about it. Finally, yeah, okay.
Just before he moves on, he's spoken powerfully about the work that was undertaken by British Armed Forces personnel during the Troubles and subsequently in addressing the unexploded ordnance threat in Northern Ireland. When I was the Armed Forces Minister, I had the privilege of visiting one of those units and seeing for myself the incredible work that they did. Would he join me, and I'm sure all members this morning, in paying fulsome tribute to those incredibly brave men and women who risk their lives day after day to uphold the rule of law in Northern Ireland?
I certainly, indeed we all will. I think Honourable Lydia said it, Honourable Gentleman in his intervention have said it, I've said it, you have said it, sorry, the Shadow Minister has said it, and I think everyone in this House will reiterate that. We owe them a great debt, and it can't be underlined enough. The last thing I want to say about the Ards incident was that the residents, there's a residents group, they come to me and said, look, could we have a public meeting to try and address some of the concerns? And to be fair, many people at McDonald's, for instance, just up the road, had given 100 vouchers or whatever it was to people as well, which people's generosity was incredible, you know. It wasn't just a trip to McDonald's, which my grandchildren love. It was a meal for someone who hadn't got a house to make a meal. So that's why the importance of it was. And I remember when I went to a public meeting, I say this with nothing to do with me, but I do try to be, as an MP, try to be representative. And I remember one of the guys says to me, I arrived out of the meeting, and he says, are you going in there? I says, I am, because I'm the MP, of course I'm going in. He says, well, you know, there's almost 100 people in there. And I says, well, I says, if I have to go and speak to people, they've asked me to come down, and I don't run away. So I went in to the meeting, and everybody was going by, oh my goodness. But you know what, the thing about people, we always need to remember, when people are under pressure, they deserve to have someone to help them. And I was able, not because I'm better than anybody else, never to do with that, because I was able to hopefully give them some answers to the queries and the questions that they had. So the Honourable Lady has brought this forward, and I think that's all part of the life of what the ordnance do, but the importance of the project. Just incidentally, no thanks to me, but 3/4 of the way through the meeting, guess what? Phone call came in, and Ashley was the girl who works to me. She says, by the way, Jim, it's all over. The bomb's exploded. There you are. So I couldn't say I delivered that, but it just happened to coincidentally. And at that, you can almost see the relief of people's faces and the lift off their shoulders as about half the meeting went out of the room to get back to their house.
To finish in McDonald's.
Yes, they all got their McDonald's chitties before they left. But honestly, I mean, that was a relief. My goodness, I never had quite a relief like it, and it was wonderful. The Honourable Lydia also highlighted in the debate Ukraine. I want to speak about Ukraine, not much longer, Mr. Chairman. Information I received prior to this date highlighted that every day 15 people are killed or injured by landmines and other explosive ordnance. Civilians account for 84% of casualties, and more than a third of those are children. My goodness. You imagine starting off your life under 10, because that's what I think I understand most of them are, with a prosthetic limb, if you can get one. And I want to speak to that. And the Honourable Lady very kindly, in setting the scene, referred to that as well, which I want to refer to. And how we do that. And I wasn't aware, by the way, until I heard the Honourable Lady saying that prosthetic limbs for men and women are different prosthetic limbs, for the very reason it should have come to my knowledge long before the Honourable Lady said it, by the way, but I just didn't quite understand it until. So I thank her for reminding us of the greater job it has to be undertook. Around 60 countries are contaminated with landmines, cluster munitions and other explosive ordnance. This includes countries where conflict has ended, such as Angola, Cambodia, and those with recent or ongoing conflicts, such as Lebanon, which is very much in the news, and Ukraine. I read in the paper, sometimes we need to be reminded, Mr. Chairman, of the conflicts that there are in the world and the impact upon Ukraine. I'm not saying that the impact upon Russia hasn't been equal. It's not about them and us. It's more about everyone who has been killed or injured. But I understand that half of the people, the numbers that were killed in Ukraine, I don't want to quote the figures because they are rather worrying when you see one paper tells you one thing the day before and another paper tells you something yesterday different again. But out of the maybe 300,000 that have been injured in Ukraine, I understand that half of them have had to have limbs replaced. The Honourable Lady mentioned that in her contribution as well. So we do, I have, and I believe, a great need. I know it's not the Minister's responsibility, but please, if you can, Minister, I really appreciate if you can, I know the Honourable Lady will as well, if we could have some idea how we can help more with those who have lost limbs, children especially, if you don't mind me saying so, men and women who have to deal with life without an arm, without a leg, perhaps without two legs. And we want to give them hope, Mr. Chairman, because that's always, when we have debates, you've got to give some people, you've got to give everyone a hope for the future and what we try to bring about. And why indeed it's important that we look towards those things for the future. The UK has long played an active role in tackling this threat, both through diplomatic efforts and funding for mine action programmes. The UK currently supports this work in 11 countries, primarily through the FCDO's Global Mine Action Programme. You know, sometimes I always do it because it's the right thing to do, Mr. Chairman, but I want to thank government and thank the previous government and this government who will continue the work, that Global Mine Action Programme, the importance of it, what it does, and hopefully the necessity to have it here for the ongoing future, for the foreseeable future, I should say, in what we do. And what help is the UK able to give to the victims, those who have lost limbs, prosthetic limbs? We lead the world in that because of the war in Afghanistan. And I see the honourable gentleman here who served in Afghanistan, honourable gentleman, gallant gentleman, in the way that he did, and we thank him for his efforts and the efforts of many others. It is incredibly important that we give people hope. And I think as well, and some of the things we look back in the last couple of years, Prince Harry and the Invictus Games, wow, what an example that gives the world of those who have prosthetic limbs and what they can achieve. To me, I just always watch those programmes because they're just so incredibly encouraging to see people overcome disabilities in a positive way. And also the Paralympics, again, a mix of life, those with disabilities and some of those who have lost their limbs through other reasons, whatever they may be, and how they can achieve so much. When we see what can be achieved when you have a prosthetic limb, when you have the opportunity to re-engage in life again and have some sort of normality, I think that's so important. So the Honourable Lady's debate today, for me, is a twofold purpose. One is the experiences of Newton Ards just 4 months ago, but today and where we are in this world. And my hope would be, Mr. Chairman, that over the next years to come, I know the Minister, I've absolutely no doubt the Minister will be totally committed to achieving the same goals that we hope to achieve here as well. So I'm fully supportive of the programme, the Global Mine Action Programme, and would urge government to continue to support this scheme. and take the fear that we in Newtownards struggled in a small way for a week away from those who live their life in fear of unexploded ordnance across this world, particularly in Ukraine. I suppose I'm the eternal optimist in the world, and President Trump is now the President-elect. He has said that the conflict in Ukraine, he'll do his best to try and bring it to an end. I think there seems to be a movement. I'm reading this as an observationally, by the way. President Zelensky seems to be understanding that there's going to be an agreement coming. Whenever that peace comes, and we hope it will, then we have to rebuild Ukraine back to the Ukraine it was, and we have to help people to re-engage and restart life for them, and that's where the prosthetic limbs comes in. But we also have to remove all of that ordnance that the Honourable Lady referred to and her contribution in Ukraine. It will take many years for that to happen, so we can have the agricultural land back to the grain fields that feed the world and feed Africa in particular. And that's why, Mr. Chairman, this debate's important. And that's why today we asked for all of those things. Thank you so much.
Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to speak. With my late arrival, and I understand that I perhaps haven't followed normal procedure, but I would like to start by acknowledging the Honourable and Gallant Member for Epsom and Elwell for securing this important debate to support explosive ordnance and disposal community. The work of this community saves lives, enables an economic recovery and helps rebuild societies devastated by conflict. It's a critical aspect of our national and international security, and it deserves our utmost attention today. The global threat of explosive ordnance, as we've heard, results in the death of 15 people every day through explosive ordnance. And this includes landmines, cluster munitions, unexploded bombs left behind in the aftermath of conflicts. Civilians account for 84% of these casualties, and over a third of these are children. These tragic figures remind us of the enduring danger that explosive ordnance possesses long after the fighting has ceased. Contamination spans 60 countries, affecting regions with recent conflicts such as those that have been mentioned in Ukraine and in particular Gaza, and as well as those with decades-old legacies. And as we heard from our Right Honourable Member, that those places include Cambodia and Angola that are particularly afflicted. These weapons are not just remnants of violence, they are barriers to progress, safety and prosperity, and they particularly impact the lives of women who have to transverse the terrain to sustain their families in a disproportionate way. And that's something that we must not overlook when discussing the unexplosive ordnance detritus that is left after war. Mine action goes beyond clearing explosive ordnance, and it restores hope and opportunity in the manner in which I've discussed. Studies show that every pound spent on mine clearance yields about fourfold return in economic benefits, and unlocking land and agriculture, and as I discussed, the routes for normal daily life, particularly for women, but also for children in education and infrastructure. In Lebanon, for example, clearing landmines has enabled safer farming access to critical resources like water, benefiting thousands of families. Explosive ordnance clearance also supports global humanitarian objectives. It aligns with sustainable development goals, fostering food security, economic growth and safer communities. This work exemplifies the transformative power of collaboration between governments, NGOs and local communities. And this country has a proud contribution to this, and I think that is the source of this debate today. We have a long-standing and distinguished record of mine action, and as one of the first signatories to the Anti-Mine Personnel Ban Convention and Convention on Cluster Munitions, our country has demonstrated unwavering commitment in upholding international humanitarian law. Programmes like the FCDO's Global Mine Action Programme, the UK has directly supported explosive ordnance disposal in 11 countries, benefiting over 1 million people between 2018 and 2020 alone. Organisations like the MAG and the Halo Trust, where I've been very proud to speak and to associate myself, are headquartered here in the UK. They are global leaders, and they showcase the best of British expertise and values. I was also very grateful to a previous speaker who made a very important point and powerful point about the honouring the support and contribution of our veterans. And as we discuss the impacts of explosive ordnance globally, we must also turn our attention to the incredible legacy of our Afghan veterans, many of whom have been injured by landmines while serving our country. This is not just a historical issue, it is an ongoing responsibility. We will see every day veterans going about their ordinary business with prosthetic limbs, and they are a valid and valuable contribution, part of our community. And it's for this reason the Armed Forces Covenant is essential in reminding us of our moral obligation to support those who have sacrificed so much for our security. This evening I will meet with other gallant members, the Afghanistan veterans, and we will hear firsthand of their experiences and the challenges they face. Their courage and resilience reminds us of the importance of addressing their needs, from healthcare to employment and community support. Events, as previously mentioned, such as the Invictus Games, which celebrate and strengthen the determination of our injured service personnel, are a testament to what can be achieved when we come together to honour and support these individuals. Absolutely.
Would you agree with me that there's tremendous work done by groups like the Army Benevolent Fund that does outstanding work in helping veterans like people that he has described, and that we all should support them? I tabled an early day motion yesterday to draw attention to that because of some of the remarkable achievements that that Benevolent Fund has been able to enact in helping former personnel.
I thank my honourable member for his very powerful and significant intervention. The service charities are critical in enabling and supporting our veterans, and I think part of what they do, which makes what they do so powerful, is it allows us to normalise those people within the community and treat them as a normal part of our community, and there will be a visible and lasting legacy from those veterans, and it's essential that the service charities that support our veterans continue to do so long into the future. But these efforts, as we've just discussed, must be matched by real and sustained commitments from the government. I welcome the presence of the Veterans Minister, who I know has been so key in ensuring that these issues are addressed and that no veterans are left behind. The Labour government, or our government, defence industrial strategy also enhances our contribution by integrating explosive ordnance disposal into the broader framework of our national armaments. This strategy prioritises UK-based businesses, fosters long-term partnership and drives innovation at a wartime pace. It also ensures that the regions beyond London benefit from job creation and economic growth. However, as a London MP, I would like to see that opportunity opened to all people, including our very bright and promising youth in London, as we produce literally thousands of personnel that are ready to engage with these STEM-based jobs and opportunities. In addition, this approach aligns with our national security goals and the work of organisations like MAG, for instance, where their work in the Lebanon counts for the removal of live munitions decades after their use. And this is a demonstration of how targeted landmine clearance can transform lives. Similarly, as we've already heard, in Ukraine, an estimated nearly 1,500 square kilometres of land remains contaminated, and this will increase massively and impact a country where agriculture is central to its very existence. Our support must not just be humanitarian, it's also vital to global stability and the stability of our food-bearing nations such as the Ukraine. But the lessons from Ukraine don't end there. On Tuesday, the Defence Committee, we heard about some of the lessons we were learning from Ukraine support, and how our defence industry, who are engaged in this, can rapidly iterate and provide the support that is most relevant to the battlefield situation that the Ukrainians face. This is ultimately similar to the battlefields that we need to prepare to face as NATO allies, given Russia's ongoing strategy of escalating aggression. I wonder if the Minister could set out any thoughts on how this point can be applied to the ordnance removal mission we share with our partners both in Ukraine and around the world. Surely the broader point is that UK expertise, whether that is in supplying military support or explosives removal, can only grow in ways that benefit our own interest and those of our partners if we are responsive to changing circumstances and able and willing to learn quickly. Explosive ordnance disposal is also an economic opportunity. The UK defence sector already supports 434,000 jobs, with, as I've stated, 67% of these located away from the southeast. By aligning mine action with defence investments, we can ensure that the regions grow across the UK and that all parts of the UK, including my constituents, benefit from this vital work. Mr. Speaker, the challenges posed by explosive ordnance require a sustained and collaborative effort. I urge the Government to restore and expand funding for mine action programmes, particularly in heavily affected regions like Lebanon and the Ukraine. This is not just about saving lives, it is about demonstrating Britain's values on the world stage. We must also strengthen our partnerships with NGOs, industry and academia, leveraging the unique expertise that the UK has to offer. By doing so, we can ensure that our nation continues to lead in explosive ordnance disposal, delivering both humanitarian and strategic benefits. In closing, let us reaffirm our commitment to explosive ordnance disposal and to the global fight against these silent and often unseen killers. Together we can save lives, foster development, and most importantly, uphold Britain's proud tradition as a force for good in the world.
Democrat spokesperson Cameron Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. It's an honour to speak under your chairship. I commend my gallant colleague, the member for Epsom and Ewell, for bringing forward this important debate. I have the honour of representing the Liberal Democrats as Defence spokesperson in her stead. I never served on the ground in Afghanistan, and I never met Staff Sergeant Olaf Schmid. But Staff Sergeant Schmid did serve in Afghanistan, and he disarmed 64 improvised explosive devices during a tour of duty in 2009. Undoubtedly, he saved many of our brave soldiers and civilians in doing so. He had been deployed to Afghanistan from his unit in Didcot, just a few miles from my own unit at RAF Benson. Staff Sergeant Schmid was killed while disarming his 65th device in November 2009. On the final day of his deployment, he was 30 years old. The day before, he had telephoned his 5-year-old stepson, who had told him, "Daddy, it's time to come home." His is one of so many personal stories of heroism and tragedy that our soldiers brought back from Afghanistan. And in truth, I don't know why Staff Sergeant Schmid's story gripped me so tightly, but I did used to drive past Vauxhall Barracks and Didcot every weekend from RAF Benson. And I always recalled that somewhere was Olaf's family, whose hero never came home. One particular family of so many. My gallant colleague's words stirred up some lost memories from my own career. She mentioned the enduring threat of the explosive remnants of war to the Ukrainian agricultural community. I recall a tour of the battlefields of France and Belgium in 2015, where I learned that even after 100 years, farmers and their cattle are regularly killed by leftover munitions. In 2010, I served a deployment to the Falkland Islands. A drive between Mount Pleasant Airfield and Stanley would take me past miles and miles of land demarked by warning signs, alerting me to minefields. These mines don't always stay where they're planted. In fact, they can move over time, given the harshness of the weather systems in the Falkland Islands. Having left the armed forces in 2023, I'm proud now to stand with the Liberal Democrats, and together we stand for all victims of conflict, participants and innocents. Anti-personnel mines are a particularly sinister tool of war, often maiming and killing long after conflicts have ended. Often those affected are civilians, including children. Our Ukrainian sister party, Servant of the People, has continuously raised the issue of cluster munitions and the continuing impact that they have on civilians since Russia's illegal full-scale invasion in 2022. The 2024 Landmine Monitor report, published in November 2024, shows at least 5,757 casualties from landmines and the explosive remnants of war, an increase of 22% since 2022. I thank also my honourable friends from Northern Ireland for reminding me that it is not just overseas that this is an issue, but here within the United Kingdom too, something which our predecessor, Lord Ashdown, spoke so passionately and eloquently about. The Liberal Democrats recognise that there are lasting impacts to being struck by such an explosive device as a mine or unexploded ordnance. Often those impacts are lifelong, both for the victim and for their loved ones. We therefore call for a full programme of support to provide the medical and psychological assistance to victims and families of those impacted by such devices. We celebrate the work carried out by the explosive ordnance disposal community, and we praise their courage in supporting communities impacted by mines and other warfare. We call on the government to restore the international development budget to 0.7% of national income, as it was the last time the Liberal Democrats were in government. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Thank you very much, Mr. Dowd, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning. Having seen my order paper over coffee, may I offer you my congratulations on your appointments to Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, an extremely responsible post where we all have utter confidence you will do very well. Good luck, sir.
Thank you.
Perhaps I should begin, Mr. Dowd, by declaring a personal family interest of sorts in this subject. My late father, Stoker First Class Reginald Francois, served on a minesweeper during the Second World War, named HMS Bresset from 1943 until the war ended. So he was involved in a kind of bomb disposal of a sort, perhaps more accurately mine disposal, but nevertheless he personally faced a threat from large explosive devices, albeit in a maritime context. So as his son, I'm proud to be speaking on behalf of Her Majesty's opposition on this very important subject this morning. I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Epsom and Ewell for securing this important debate and, if I may say so, for introducing it so ably. The Honourable Member made a very knowledgeable contribution to the topic, no doubt drawing on her own military experience, And I think in particular, she highlighted and illustrated the challenge posed to the international community by the sheer scale of this problem around the world. The Honourable Member for Strangford spoke powerfully about the threat from terrorist bombs in Northern Ireland, which is a subject I would like to return to later. The Honourable Member for Leighton and Wanstead, an RAF veteran, if I may call him that, also addressed the international scale of the challenge. And last but not least, I'm supported by our Defence PPS this morning, the Honourable Member for Exmouth and Exeter East, who, as a former Royal Marine, like the Minister, understands quite a lot about this subject too. In my own contribution this morning, I'd like to begin with a historical perspective on bomb disposal operations in the British Armed Forces, before moving on to address both military and increasingly civilian operations in this crucial field of activity right up to the present day. Bomb disposal, or to give it its more formal title, explosive ordnance disposal, or EOD for short, can be traced back for over a century. During the First World War, squads of men were assembled to help deal with unexploded bombs left after raids on London and the South East by German Zeppelin bombers and their Gopher Giant aircraft counterparts, a bombing campaign that was very well summarised by Neil Hansen in his book First Blitz. In addition, with the advent of truly industrialised warfare in the First World War, teams of engineers were needed to dispose of unexploded munitions, particularly high explosive shells that had fallen among the Allied trenches on the Western Front but failed to detonate. Even at that time, this was highly skilled and extremely dangerous work, a characteristic which has remained true right through to the present day. By the time of the Second World War, whilst the need for bomb disposal on the battlefield was undiminished, with the advent of mass bombing of civilian targets, the need for bomb disposal on the home front expanded accordingly. This led to a high death toll among those brave enough to undertake the task of dealing with unexploded bombs, or UXBs, as they were characterised at that time. Julie Gardner, in her book, simply entitled The Blitz, describes the losses in the following terms, and I think this is quite evocative. Quote, "Sometimes a UXB might embed itself a few feet in the ground, or fall into a static water tank or a gasometer, that many penetrated deep below the surface and were difficult to get at. The diffuser's survival would have depended on staying one step ahead of German technology, since as soon as they learnt how a one-time delay mechanism worked, it would be replaced by another. By the end of 1940, 123 officers and men of the bomb disposal squads had been killed and 67 wounded. The deaths did not cease at the end of the war, as UXBs continued to be uncovered. By 1947, 490 had been killed in the battle to extract these great torpid iron pigs from their holes and to render them harmless. The need for EOD workers continued as a facet of British military operations since the end of the Second World War, right up to the present day. For instance, dealing with both Republican and so-called loyalist bombs was a key facet of Operation Banner, the British Army's campaign to support the civil authorities during the period of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. A number of bomb disposal officers were killed and many were wounded during the course of the Troubles, as the Honourable Member for Strangford rightly reminded us. The scale of the task they were up against was well summarised by Desmond Hamill in his book, Pig in the Middle, about the British Army's role in Northern Ireland. He summarised the challenge as follows, quote, "Over the years, the provisionals have become expert at designing and manufacturing booby traps. Only the week before, a bomb disposal sergeant had been killed by a bomb within a bomb in County Fermanagh. It had been packed into a milk churn When the sergeant had cleared the timing device and was lifting it out, a detonator underneath set off the second bomb, which exploded. As the author went on to explain, the bombs were often very simple and very deadly. The components were readily available. A few pounds of explosives, a detonator, a battery, and a couple of feet of wire. The triggering device could either be a plate buried in the ground or even a clothes peg. As the Minister will be well aware, hundreds of thousands of British soldiers served on Operation Banner during the Troubles. Hundreds were killed, not just in bomb disposal. And many thousands were maimed and had life-changing industries from both Republican and so-called loyalist terrorism. So perhaps when he sums up this debate, the Minister could say a few words about why the government still intends to abolish the Northern Ireland Legacy Act, as it's known, which would open many Northern Ireland veterans up yet again to an endless cycle of reinvestigation, much of it politically motivated at the hands of Sinn Féin. Our veterans who face terrorist bombs as a threat every day of their service in Northern Ireland really do deserve better than this from their government. Turning to the Falklands. Defusing unexploded bombs is not just a challenge on land. As pointed out by Lord Ashcroft in his book, Falklands War Heroes, during the 1982 Falklands War, Chief Marine Engineering Mechanic John Townsend was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal for his role in assisting with the disposal of 2 bombs which had hit his ship, HMS Argonaut. The principal bomb disposal task with which he assisted was undertaken by Staff Sergeant Jim Prescott and Warrant Officer 2nd Class WO2 John Phillips, both of the Royal Engineers. Assisted by Townsend and several of the crew, the 2 bomb disposal experts succeeded in disarming and disposing of both of the Argentinian bombs that had landed on the Argonaut. Unfortunately, however, Staff Sergeant Prescott from 49 Squadron Royal Engineers was killed 2 days later whilst attempting a similar task with 2 further unexploded bombs that had landed on her sister ship, HMS Antelope. His colleague, WO2 Phillips, was badly injured, losing one of his arms in the latter attempt. I mention this particular example not just to pay tribute to the extreme bravery of all 3 men involved, one of whom sadly lost his life, but also to point out that dealing with ordnance of this type is not something which is purely confined to the land domain. Yes.
The Shadow Minister for giving way, and would like to link that point back to his earlier remark where he shared very powerful contributions about his grandfather's...
My father.
Father's service. I didn't want to age him. Service in the maritime domain. It's a powerful reminder that explosive ordnance disposal is not simply confined to land or to landmines or to the things that we see as bombs. And building on that, I wanted to highlight the contributions of the Royal Navy today, its divers in particular, and its ongoing mine clearance operations that continue in the Gulf alongside our partners in the US and with the French Navy. And I would ask if he would agree with me that we must ensure to highlight these valid and brave contributions in the debate as he continues.
I thank the honourable member for his kind words about my father, and I absolutely do agree with him about the very important role that is played in maritime bomb disposal, including by the very brave divers that he alluded to. And for completeness, as he's a former RAF officer, we should place on the record that a great deal of work was undertaken, particularly in the Second World War, diffusing German bombs that had landed on RAF airfields, especially and perhaps most famously during the Battle of Britain. So the Royal Air Force played their part in this battle against bombs as well. If I can turn to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, As the involvement of Britain's armed forces, particularly the army, switched from Northern Ireland through the Balkans and then into the Middle East, including the First and Second Gulf Wars, and also the war in Afghanistan, again the threat from bombs, now at that time often referred to as improvised explosive devices, or IEDs for short, remained ever present. As General Sir Richard Dannett, the former Chief of the General Staff, recalled in his memoir, Leading from the Front, I quote, "Initially the Taliban had taken us on with small arms, machine guns and rocket grenades. But as they tired of being killed in large numbers, they resorted to the classic insurgent tactic of avoiding direct combat and attacking us instead with IEDs, in exactly the same way as the Iraqi militias and the provisional IRA had done before them." The minister himself served in Afghanistan, and we pay tribute to his service in the House this morning. The need to respond to the IED threat, which was eventually responsible for a large number of casualties, both fatal and non-fatal, but nonetheless in many cases life-changing, was an important aspect, particularly of Operation HoC, the Allied campaign in Afghanistan. Simon Aitken explained in his challenging book, The Changing of the Guard, the British Army since 9/11. He put it in the following terms. Quote, "The IED became the signature weapon of the Helmand conflict. No longer could troops move freely. Instead, they adopted the Afghan snake, painstakingly walking in a line behind a young soldier holding a Vallon mine detector." In the other place, Lord Lancaster of Kimbolton, a former Milton Keynes MP, when he was in this House, and a previous Minister of State for the Armed Forces, worked on EOD disposal during Operation HoC, and we pay tribute to his service and that of all his EOD colleagues this morning. Even today, Mr Dowd, the task of explosive ordnance disposal, now carried out principally by 11 EOD regiments of the Royal Logistics Corps, remains as vital as ever, both in terms of protecting our civilian population from domestic acts of terrorism and also in permitting the conduct of military operations. Some of the savage fighting in Ukraine has included widespread use of booby traps and other IEDs, and therefore the threat remains as live as ever on the modern battlefield. Indeed, in their very helpful briefing note for this important debate, the Mines Advisory Group highlights that the Ukrainian government estimates that around a third of its territory, or around 156,000 square kilometres, an area bigger than England, remains potentially contaminated with explosive ordnance. For the record, the previous government invested in the latest EOD technology for our own armed forces, including the Harris T7 bomb disposal robot, the successor of the iconic wheelbarrow from Northern Ireland, and more recently, the T7's highly nimble little brother, the Harris T4, a programme which was encouraged by my honourable friend for South Suffolk when he was the procurement minister at the MOD. Turning directly to the speech by the honourable member for Epsom and Newell, she summarised very well the challenge still posed by unexploded ordnance in the present day, not just, as she pointed out, in Ukraine, but also in a number of other countries around the world, including Laos and Lebanon. And we should pay tribute this morning to the work of two UK-led organisations, the Mines Advisory Group, as previously mentioned, and also the Halo Trust, who have literally led the world in seeking to step up and to address this challenge. Given all of this, can I ask the Minister, when he replies to the debate, in addition to my point about the legacy bill, if he could answer three specific questions? One, is the government minded to continue spending at least the same amount of money on overseas mine disposal in 2025-26 as it is currently doing in 2024-25? Secondly, much of that spending is deployed via the FCDO's Global Mine Action Programme, the GMAP, and the UK's Integrated Security Fund. Is any of that funding from the MOD budget? And if so, would it be potentially vulnerable to the Strategic Defence Review? And thirdly, related to the second question, when do we expect the outcome of the SDR to be published? I asked this morning Mr Dowd because rumours are now circulating it could be as late as June of 2025. So while we have his company this morning, could the Minister provide any update to the House on the likely publication timing of the SDR, which, as he knows, is keenly anticipated? So in conclusion, Mr Dowd, I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to all those personnel, be they armed forces or civilian, who have had the courage to take part in the extremely dangerous task of explosive ordnance disposal down the decades. This is harrowing work, and not for the faint-hearted, but in risking their lives, they have helped to save the lives of countless others. Sadly, a number of those employed in that highly dangerous line of work made the ultimate sacrifice, and we rightfully pay tribute to them this morning as well. We will remember them.
Minister.
First of all, I'd like to start this response with 4 thank yous. Thank you very much for your chairmanship today. Thank you to the Honourable Member from Epsom Elwell of initiating this debate. It's exceptionally important. Thank you to all the honourable and gallant members that spoke today. And of course, most importantly, the individuals who are in the room who have taken part in EOD, the bravery, the courage and the sacrifice at the very front of the line, which has really demonstrated the courage to us all over the last several decades. First of all, I think it's worthwhile talking about capability. From an EOD perspective, they consist of about 700 service personnel drawn from the British Army, the Royal Navy, and indeed transferred in from the RAF, and a highly trained unit in the Metropolitan Police also, staffed by former members of the Army in particular. They operate a state of exceptionally high readiness, 365 days a year, and on average they deal with a staggering 2,300 EOD incidents across the UK each year, and that's not to mention overseas as well. And that's from legacy World War II munitions to the improvised explosive device of criminals and terrorists mentioned by the Honourable Member from Strangford. Our EOD operators are highly trained and they're world-renowned, equipped to deal with a full range of explosive threats, including devices with chemical, biological, radiological, or even indeed nuclear payloads, all the way through to supporting allies across NATO and beyond. And they deserve, from my perspective, and I think the collective individuals in this room, our absolute appreciation and our thanks from the Government, from Parliament, and indeed the entire country. So some of the domestic impact. Over the years, our explosive ordnance disposal teams have dealt with countless, and I mean countless, potential lethal devices and incidents. From pipe bombs, car bombs and improvised mortars in the Troubles in Northern Ireland, to devices produced by domestic extremists, all the way through to 500 to 1,000 kilogram bombs. Removed, for example, from the back garden of a residential property in the constituency of the Minister for Armed Forces in February. As well as other high-profile World War II bombs discovered over recent months in Newtownards in Northern Ireland in August, Tilbury in November, and South Sea just last week. So the role in warfare. It's a capability that is absolutely vital to the way we fight and to our troops, and indeed to protecting the civilian population. Our EOD experts were critical to operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, but not just limited to. Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, the Middle East, Africa, there are EOD operators from other countries across the globe and in every continent. I remember from my own personal experience being sat in many a ditch in Afghanistan when there was extremely heavy firefights ongoing, and the only individual that moved forward was the individual in the bomb disposal suit, usually on his belly or with a dog, crawling forward towards the threat. And I think this underlines a really critical point, that courage isn't necessarily a reaction, courage is a decision. And the EOD operators that I've worked with have to make that decision, and never once did they ever falter. Deeply, deeply impressive. And I had the privilege, just in a surgery this week, in my constituency in Birmingham, talking to an individual who had a family member killed in the Birmingham pub bombings, which really brought it home again that the Northern Ireland, the impact of Northern Ireland wasn't just in Northern Ireland, it spread all the way through the UK on a regular basis, often forgotten in today's society. I'd also like to thank those EOD operators who I worked with personally in the maritime domain. Defusing an improvised explosive device or a mine on land is difficult. Doing it subsurface in the dark is exceptionally difficult. And so it's really worthwhile just taking a moment to think about how difficult that would be, but also the courage required to do that whilst on a dive set underneath the surface of the ocean. As we move on to industry and economic growth, I think it's worth noting that in addition to keeping us safe, and indeed our troops safe, our EOD capability also has an important economic legacy. It feeds our scientific and industrial base, as mentioned by my honourable friend. It helps sustain cutting-edge design, particularly in robotics and detection technologies. And the MOD is working with the Department of Business and Trade to help unlock export opportunities for British companies and help grow our economy. And I'd like to discuss that in due course to see how we can move that forward faster. The evolving threats. As the threat increases to the UK and our NATO allies from grey zone Russian attacks and sabotage, so does the importance of our EOD capabilities. And on that same line of evolving warfare, it's also worth noting that it needs to evolve to contend with the evolution that is going on in warfare, mentioned by the honourable member about drones and battery-led technology when it comes to the use of explosives. Globally, EOD operations are becoming increasingly complex, with states and violent extremist organisations using a mixture of conventional and improvised explosive devices. Fuses, switches, sensors, metal-less IEDs are becoming more intricate and advanced. And in Ukraine, whose EOD and search operations have received UK training, we have seen the increasing use of airdropped improvised munitions from commercial drones, illustrating how future conflicts will be characterised by a huge variety of explosive threats, often blurring the line between conventional munitions and improvised explosive devices. We should expect these weapons to be deployed in ever more diverse ways in the future of conflict against both troops, airfields, maritime assets, and indeed civilians in the future. And the capabilities we need to respond will have to keep pace, talking again to innovation and moving forward as fast as we possibly can. Because EOD capabilities will remain essential to the freedom of movement on the battlefield, combat effectiveness and reducing the loss of life in due course. From a procurement perspective, it's really important to ensure EOD personnel have exactly what they need when they need it and the best technology. And you have our word within MOD that we will continue to do that. From a policy perspective, and as part of our Strategic Defence Review, that will make recommendations on the roles, capabilities and reforms we require in defence to meet the challenges, threats and the opportunities we face. And the Government will review the EOD policy and capabilities and ensure their operational capabilities remain fit for the future. It'd be worth, I think it's worth myself turning to some of the questions that were mentioned throughout the debate, and in particular to the Honourable Member from Epsom Ewell. First of all, I agree that our EOD capability can be used as a diplomatic tool. Demining expertise primarily save life, and that must be the ultimate principle. But it also really supports economic growth and reconstruction. People can reuse the land. Huge swathes of terrain across the world are rendered, I wouldn't say useless, but ineffective because of mines or contamination. It opens up urban areas, and it reduces the impact, importantly, to international shipping, which I think is often overlooked. And that impact can translate into billions of pounds of lost trade. But this is best done collaboratively, and from my perspective, it's really important that to understand it's exceptionally difficult to do it unless we have a cessation of violence. And so we must move towards that first. Going on to the talk about medical research, we actually have some of the best medical research in the world on blast injuries, both physical and psychological. And we're working with our Ukrainian allies and others to make sure those lessons are learnt and translated to others, allies and partners. And I'd be delighted to work with the Honourable Member on any licensing issues she has found that we could perhaps progress faster. From the Honourable Member of Strangford, I think it's worth recognising that this it can often be branded as new. The UK and Northern Ireland have dealt with this for the last 50 years and some. And recognising the considerable amount of time the citizens of the UK and Northern Ireland and the security services have dealt with EOD issues over a huge amount of time. And I think there's a debt of gratitude to individuals who have gone through that process and dealt with the very early stages of EOD and IED development and defusing. He also mentioned a really useful, or put the problem into context by outlining Ukraine. In the counter-offensive last year alone, it's worth noting that Ukraine faced over 60,000 anti-tank mines. They had hundreds of thousands of anti-personnel mines, sometimes triple-stacked, and 10% of all munitions fired in Ukraine, specifically Russian munitions, do not detonate. Put that into scale when there's 10 to 16,000 artillery rounds being fired a day. You know, you're talking World War II statistics. And so this is not a problem that's going to go away today. It's going to last a generation. So investing in our EOD capabilities, championing the charities that do so, is absolutely front and centre. So how can we help? And we mentioned again, how can we further help Ukraine? There is a relationship to shared lessons learned and best practice, both in the physical and the psychological issues. And of course, we do champion our veterans, specifically those who have been injured or on the journey through recovery through the Invictus Games. It's in Canada next year, and of course, it's coming to Birmingham the year after, which is absolutely superb. And I'd encourage anyone in the House to support that as it comes to fruition. The honourable friend from Leighton and Wanstead, I thought really pertinent point was to highlight this isn't just British casualties from EOD or improvised explosive devices. One of my very close friends lost 3 of his limbs, who I was in training with. The last time I arrived in Selly Oak in Birmingham, just outside Selly Oak Hospital in Birmingham, outside my constituency, was actually taking an Afghan casualty there who'd lost 3 limbs. And the amazing work from the surgeons there kept him alive, and now he's thriving within the UK, which is truly remarkable. I also think it's really important to champion the charities and encourage, where possible, support both financially and physically to those organisations, whether that be the Halo Trust or any others. And again, I support his views on cadets and reserves, both from a social mobility perspective and, of course, mobilisation. The Honourable gallant member from Tewkesbury, a really heart-moving story there from an EOD operator with an unprecedented record of defusing capabilities. And think how many lives he'd saved by doing that. So thank you very much for bringing that to light. And then my honourable member from Rayleigh and Wickford. I think it's really important to reinforce the impact of your father's contribution to the Second World War. It's often forgotten that mine hunting, or mine clearing as it was called then, was absolutely essential to the D-Day landings, to the Arctic convoys, to our trade and our war supplies from America and across the Empire in the day. And it was truly remarkable. And I would say that because when I was in my last job, which was the Chief of Staff of the Carrier Strike Force, integral to that strike force were, of course, mine hunting capabilities. And it's worth just paying just a little bit of a word to this, because the impact of mine laying at sea, and there are huge mine stocks, maritime mine stocks across the world, can have a demonstrable impact to the world's economy. And our economy is primarily based on overseas trade. So it's worth just thinking about that. There are huge stocks of very sophisticated capabilities, and I think it's really, really important. I have also been really clear throughout every debate that I've spoken to, or any question that I've asked, so that you have my word that I will support veterans both legally, with legal and welfare support from Northern Ireland. I am a Northern Ireland veteran myself. I did 6 months out there under Op Banner. I recognise the issues, and you have my word that I, as the Veterans Minister, will support them with everything I can. We will also continue to invest in mine disposal capabilities, whether that be EOD, all the way through to some of the more bigger capabilities, whether that be a plough at the front of an armoured column in a division that digs the mines up before an armoured thrust or an armoured movement. The details of that will come out in the SDR. I'm not going into the exact details of the budget because we don't know, because as we move forward, the SDR will produce that, and that will be delivered next year. And the details will follow in due course. In conclusion, from the early forms of bomb disposal, even in 1605, following the gunpowder plot, to the 1,000-kilogram World War II bomb destroyed by the Royal Navy clearance divers in Portsmouth last week. Our history has shown us that explosive ordnance disposal is vital to security home and abroad. And whilst I cannot preempt the Strategic Defence Review, nor the recommendations and capabilities that will flow from it, honourable members should be in absolutely no doubt about the high esteem in which we as a government hold our EOD professionals, and in no doubt about our appreciation of the vital safety blanket they provide over the whole country, and in no doubt at all about our appreciation to the need to bolster their capabilities in the face of morphing and multiplying threats. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ellen Maguire to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Mr. Dowd for his excellent chairmanship of this debate, the Minister for his reassuring responses, and I really look forward to working with him on these particular issues, and for all colleagues, members here today for their absolutely valuable contributions during the debate. It was really helpful for the member for Stratford to outline the different domestic challenges that we've had in the past and we continue to have. And I personally also want to thank the EOD community for all of their hard work in keeping us safe 365 days a year. It was interesting to hear from the member for Leighton and Wanstead also about all the different countries around the world where we are working to demine in Angola, Cambodia, Lebanon, as well as in Ukraine, and this work continues. Members highlighted again the real importance of continuing to support our veterans, those with prosthetic limbs, and civilians with prosthetic limbs as well. And it's incredibly important that we continue to do this. For those of us who have served, many of us will know people who were killed or injured by explosive ordnance, and many people explain that today, and so it's absolutely vitally important that we continue to support our veterans. The member for Leighton and Wanstead also mentioned about how mines really impact women globally and their ability to continue to work post-conflict, and how it's important that how important it is that demining supports our global humanitarian goals and the UN SDGs, and it's absolutely really the vital work there. Again, I just want to thank the contribution of all the charities that help towards all the demining work globally, the Halo Trust and others. And finally, I just want to talk about the APPG. If Vicky McClure is listening today, I just talked to her because she did raise the profile of the OD community in her Trigger Point series, and I hope that in January, if she is listening, that maybe she can come along and help launch the APPG. But I also extend an invitation to colleagues here today to join the new APPG, to engage with our planned inquiries and to support the incredible efforts of those in our mine action, explosive ordnance disposal and victim assistance communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, the question is that this House has considered government support for the explosive ordnance disposal community. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.